The attack on America raised so many questions. Among them, questions about the dangers of the new world economy. Is terrorism the dark side of globalization?
Up until September 11th, there was a sense that this movement towards globalization really was irreversible. And since then, there's a recognition that things can go in another direction.
Can our deeply interconnected world deliver prosperity to everyone?
And that's basically the next big challenge, is making this interdependent world of ours, on balance, far more positive and negative. And the extent to which we succeed in doing that will determine whether the 21st century is either marred by terrorism of all kinds, or whether it becomes the most peaceful and prosperous and interesting time the world's ever known.
This is the story of how the new global economy was born. The story of a century-long battle of ideas to determine who would control the commanding heights of the economy, central governments or free markets. In the 1990s, a worldwide capitalist revolution fueled the new era of globalization, the greatest expansion of world trade in history.
Billions of people a day are better off than they would have been without globalization, and very few people have been harmed by it.
But with the promise came a debate about the impact of globalization.
Should the world's wealthiest people really dictate how the world's economy is going to run?
Tonight, the battle over who should write the new rules of the game for the global economy.
This program was made possible by
EDS, offering business and technology solutions from strategy and implementation to hosting. EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
FedEx. Globality may be new to some, but to us, it's the way we do business.
We're reinventing the energy business as we develop American oil and gas, next-generation clean fuels, and renewables like solar power. We're the people of BP.
Additional funding was provided by the Pew Charitable Trusts, the John Templeton Foundation, the Smith Richardson Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Out of the sorrow of September 11th, I see opportunity. A chance for nations to strengthen and rethink and reinvigorate their relationships. When nations open their markets to the world, they find in America a trading partner, an investor, and a friend.
We are living through a revolution. The 1990s saw the creation of a new kind of global economy. A single market in which everyone has a stake, but no one has control. globalization has brought unprecedented prosperity. But it has also brought crises and risks we are only beginning to understand. It has unleashed a worldwide debate about wealth and poverty, about the rules of the game for this new era of globalization.
Historians may well say that a new era began at the beginning of the 1990s with the end of the Cold War and the Gulf crisis. And that was this new era of globalization, of a world being tied together by flows of investment, of trade, of ideas, of culture, of people traveling all the time. And it happened very fast, and as so often happened, the change came more quickly than the ability of thinking to catch up and understand the change. But to understand where we are today and where we're going, we have to understand this recent past.
No economic idea has shaped the era of globalization more profoundly than a belief in free, open markets. Free trade has been a fundamental tenet of capitalism for over 200 years. But in the 1990s, the global market created a new reality that no government, no politician could afford to ignore. Our story begins in 1992. The global economy was changing rapidly, but America seemed adrift. A recession had left 10 million workers unemployed. Industries struggled against intense foreign competition. Europe had formed a single trading bloc. Japan looked invincible. Japanese companies were buying up American icons like Rockefeller Center and Universal Studios. In the 1992 presidential campaign, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton claimed he could get America back on track.
Have a nice day, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Have a nice one, Governor.
He drew crucial support from America's labor unions and seemed to promise workers protection against global competition.
Again, look at what our competitors do. Meet the competition. Look at what the high-wage countries do. Look at what Germany does. Look at what Japan does. That's what you got to do.
And you'll stand up against the good old boys to do that, huh?
Absolutely.
Good luck to you.
What's the purpose of having a country if you're going to let it go down the drain?
I don't know. Why have we been doing that? You got my vote.
Hey, Governor, don't forget the federal employees, too, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, my vote.
Thank you, guys.
But at a meeting with Wall Street financiers, Clinton had discussed a different agenda, an agenda some of his core supporters adamantly opposed. Financial markets wanted to rein in government spending, cut the deficit, and embrace free trade. Without these policies, they thought America's economy wouldn't recover. Over dinner in an exclusive restaurant, Clinton tried to persuade some of Wall Street's most seasoned executives that he saw the world as they did.
It was a small dinner in New York that I was co-hosting. We had about a dozen people. And my view was that the threshold economic issue for our country was to restore fiscal discipline after a long, long time during which fiscal discipline had eroded.
I could see that Reuben and the others that were there in this rather dark place where we had dinner at night were kind of looking and saying, you know, can this guy from Arkansas be president? What could he possibly know enough about the economy to do it?
After that meeting, I thought to myself that this was a man who cared about what I at least thought we needed to care a great deal about. Now, on the issue of trade, he clearly believed in trade liberalization, and that clearly has been a a dividing line the Democratic Party was then, is now.
Trade became an issue in the 1992 presidential campaign. Republican President George Bush had negotiated a treaty that would allow unrestricted flows of trade and investment between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. For its supporters, trade embodies an idea that open markets create wealth, bind nations together, and help construct a more prosperous and a more secure world. NAFTA put that idea to a political test. In America, it was the first great debate of the globalization era.
You implement that NAFTA, the Mexican trade agreement, where they pay people $1 an hour, have no health care, no retirement, no pollution controls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you're going to hear a giant sucking sound of jobs being pulled out of this country.
Ross says, with great conviction, he opposes the North American Free Trade Agreement. I am for the North American Free Trade Agreement. My problem with Governor Clinton, once again, is at one time he's going to make up his mind, he sees some merit in it, but then he sees a lot of things wrong with it. And then the other day he says he's for it, however, then we've got to pass other legislation. When you're President of the United States, you cannot have this pattern of saying, well, I'm for it, but I'm on the other side of it.
I am the one who's in the middle on this. Mr. Perot says it's a bad deal. Mr. Bush says it's a hunky-dory deal. I say, on balance, it does more good than harm if we can get some protection for the environment so that the Mexicans have to follow their own environmental standards, their own labor law standards, and if we have a genuine commitment to re-educate and retrain the American workers who lose their jobs and reinvest in this economy.
Once in office, Bill Clinton's economic policy was aimed squarely at restoring the confidence of financial markets. His first term was dominated by the battle to reduce the deficit. On trade, the president changed his position and announced he would wholeheartedly support NAFTA as it stood.
Clinton gave a speech in the East Room of the White House that set out how he wanted to discuss NAFTA with the American people. It was really quite a remarkable speech. He talked about NAFTA in a much broader context. He talked about NAFTA in the context of the rapid changes taking place in the global economy, not only from trade, but from technological development, the spread of market-based economics.
This debate about NAFTA is a debate about whether we will embrace these changes and create the jobs of tomorrow, or try to resist these changes, hoping we can preserve the economic structures of yesterday. Nothing we do in this great capital can change the fact that people can move money around in the blink of an eye. I tell you, my fellow Americans, that if we learn anything from the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the governments in Eastern Europe, even a totally controlled society cannot resist the winds of change that economics and technology and information flow have imposed in this world of ours.
To some of his supporters, the president's change of heart on NAFTA was nothing less than a sellout.
The labor movement in the United States opposed NAFTA as it stood because we saw that as a corporate-dominated trade and investment agreement, one that served the interests of multinational corporations, that improved their flexibility, their mobility, their clout. And at the same time, NAFTA did nothing to protect the rights of workers to form unions, to bargain collectively, and to really raise their voices in the political system so that workers could be a formidable countervailing power to multinational corporations. I think Clinton did sell out his traditional blue-collar supporters on the NAFTA issue, and a lot of people haven't forgiven him for that.
Our adversaries tried to make it look like the whole American establishment's on one side and the little guys are on the other. And they could, stir that fear factor. And it was a tough sell. It was a tough sell.
I thought it was one of the most courageous acts of his presidency. We worked with him very hard. The Republicans in the House provided a much bigger percent of the vote than the Democrats did.
60% of congressional Democrats voted against NAFTA. It passed only with Republican support. After NAFTA became law, thousands of foreign companies built factories in northern Mexico, exporting goods to the American market just a few miles away. 80% of all televisions sold in the U.S. are now made here. Nearly 1 million workers found new jobs along the border in northern Mexico.
Pues ya lo poco que me va quedando, pues yo lo voy ahorrando para poderle mandar a mis hijos.
I have 2 children. In the South, I didn't have a job and couldn't give my children what they need.
Pues yo no le puedo dar.
I left them behind with relatives and came here to find work. I found a job in a television factory. I earn enough to send some money home to my children. I couldn't do that before.
This is a country of over 100 million people. And there's no question that those 10 to 12 million people who live in the north and the border area are not doing badly by Mexican standards. And it has become more industrialized with more jobs, higher wages, better social indicators, etc. The people in the South are doing very badly by Mexican or by anybody's standards.
40% of Mexico's population lives in poverty. Mexico's embrace of NAFTA and free trade was part of a broader change in thinking within developing countries. Their governments increasingly saw open markets as the key to economic growth.
I worked 15 years for Coca-Cola. I started as a route salesman. I started right from the bottom. And I learned that discipline, that hard working, that talent is the way to succeed. I always seen globalization as an opportunity. Just the trade agreement with the United States has moved our total trading, which was 6 years ago $40 billion US, today is $280 billion US in just 6 years. Nobody loses, everybody can win.
Obviously, trade has increased, investment has increased, and if the only metric you use to measure whether NAFTA has been a success or not is the volume of trade, then NAFTA is tremendously successful. And yet most normal working people, most normal citizens don't watch the volume of trade. Companies have been more aggressive in threatening to move production to Mexico. They've succeeded in bargaining down wages, in opposing unions. And so on a lot of different fronts, we think that NAFTA has shifted the balance of bargaining power in the continent of North America towards multinational corporations.
Since NAFTA came into effect, about 400,000 American jobs have been adversely affected by trade with Canada and Mexico, according to the U.S. government. Exports to these countries have created more than 1 million new jobs. And over the 90s, global trade nearly doubled. We tend to think of trade as products and goods moving across borders. In fact, the biggest trade of all can't be seen. It is money, the continuous 24-hour worldwide flow of stocks, bonds, and currencies. In the 1990s, practically anyone with savings in a pension or mutual fund became an investor in the global market.
I was at a dinner, a so-called thinkers' dinner at the White House before one of the State of the Union addresses, and there's this great discussion among all the people around the table about markets, about they out there, that it's somebody different. And finally I raised my hand and said, with all due respect, the markets isn't just them, it's us. It's our aggregated retirement savings, it's our pension plans. That's what the markets are.
The state of California runs one of America's largest pension funds. The fund, known as CalPERS, manages the retirement savings of over 1 million state employees. For decades, CalPERS invested only in America. But in the era of globalization, that changed. A quarter of its money was invested overseas. At one point, CalPERS controlled 5% of France's entire stock market. French television sent a crew to investigate.
They were filming in my office, and I had a salad on my desk because it had been just a very hectic day. Well, they caught me, and we were talking about some figures on my computer, but they kept filming the salad. And I got the feeling that the story was going to be that, the Americans are coming and they're going to ruin the French way of life, and we're all going to be eating salads at our desk, and working 12 and 14-hour days, which of course is not true at all. But I think it was there's just a fear, I think, that we've seen in the news that globalization means Americanization.
Pension funds became the powerhouses of the global economy because they had the money.
The real source of change in today's world, with the world getting smaller and smaller, as we say, and the growth of the global economy, as we say, I think it's going to be the providers of capital funds. And that, whether anybody likes it or not, increasingly are large pension funds.
I have some of my own personal mutual funds overseas, and they seem to be doing pretty well right now.
And I think in terms of what CalPERS' position is, they have a fiduciary responsibility to seek those markets out and to invest and to use that return on that investment to honor their obligations.
We can't keep everything in the United States. You keep things in the United States, it's still not in the United States because so many companies are global, everything is global, everything is interconnected.
With the end of the Cold War, many nations opened their markets to foreign investment for the first time. Funds like CalPERS saw new opportunities and hired money managers to scour the third world, now renamed emerging markets.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Let me talk to Dennis, huh? Yeah, but they got an election coming up.
Well, the whole rationale is that these emerging countries grow faster. So what we're trying to do is capture that growth and, of course, make money for our investors. But, of course, the risks are very great because there's no free lunch. So there's a balance. And, of course, it's our job to try to minimize the risks and maximize the returns. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the objective.
As investment flowed around the world, the Clinton administration expanded the trade agenda it adopted with NAFTA. The U.S. encouraged developing countries to continue opening their economies to the global market.
I favored a very aggressive policy. I thought that the emerging countries, both emerging economically and those that were new democracies, had a better chance to do well economically and politically if the wealthier countries opened our borders and made trade agreements with them, and if in turn they opened their borders not only to trade but to investment. I thought that economic policy and traditional foreign policy would tend to merge.
This is how it worked. If you go back to the first term, a lot of the international approach of the administration on economic issues was to break down barriers to U.S. firms. We are going to engage our trading partners and encourage, cajole, convince them to bring down their barriers.
Many developing countries had been colonies of the West. Although they now wanted long-term foreign investment, some saw fast-moving flows of money as a new threat to their independence.
Once communism was defeated, then capitalism can expand and show its true self. It's no longer constrained by the need to be nice, so that people will choose the so-called free market system as against the centrally planned system. So because of that, now there is nothing to restrain capital, and capital is demanding that it should be able to go anywhere and do whatever it likes.
Some called it the triumph of capitalism. During the 1990s, more countries than ever adopted market economics.
Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act on our health program.
As an economics professor, Bill Christ had taught a course comparing Marxist and capitalist theories. As president of CalPERS, the California State Pension Fund, Christ came to believe that only open markets could ensure global stability.
This is a kind of revolution.